In 5, 4, 3, 2. See what I did there? Really showing my youthful age there. You know, the internet just feels so different now from how it did 20 years ago. Heck, even 10 years ago. It is different visually, technologically, and even in its utility compared to how it was in the 2000s. As a result, people's overall convictions towards the internet and its involvement in their daily lives has also evolved with it. Having said that, there are little bits and pieces of this distant past that still live on as sort of digital artifacts of their time. Their very presence serving as a kind of novelty, a reminder for how much we've changed. In a backwards way, this even counts for the websites, the communities, even the entire online worlds of the 2000s that no longer exist. The fact that you can't use them anymore is part of that, as they've essentially been reborn as symbols for the way things were. Online flash games, political satire, overly personalized HTML pages, entertainment blogs. What was the deal with these quintessential websites of the early Web 2.0 era? What was their appeal? And whatever happened to them? Today we'll be exploring the online worlds of the 2000s and the things we left behind.
The World Wide Web is getting more powerful and useful every day, so why not get the most out of it? And of course, that also involves maintaining your privacy and securing your digital footprint. Thankfully, Proton VPN has got you covered. Nice try, Patriot Act. I have the power of God and freedom on my side. Proton VPN is a platform that gives you access to over 13,000 servers across over 120 different countries. That means that Proton essentially acts as a middleman, which encrypts your internet activity and hides your IP address from both websites and ISPs. Just simply connect to the VPN server of your choosing, and Proton will completely hide your IP, effectively making it look like you're in another location. This is especially great for geo-locked content, like watching Netflix shows that aren't available in your country, or maybe even accessing a website that is censored in a certain country. And it's just one click. Now that is a fine program. Folks, have you ever seen such a lovely program? Additionally, Proton also comes with a built-in ad blocker to enhance your web browsing experience by blocking unneeded advertisements. Except this one, of course. But you wouldn't block any of my ads. No, you wouldn't do that. And above all, privacy and transparency is crucial to Proton's mission. Not only is their commitment to digital privacy and not logging your activity backed by a strong legal foundation, but their program is also open source, allowing for the public to inspect it for quality assurance. And right now, Proton is doing a limited Black Friday offer. Head over to protonvpn.com/nationsquid to get 75% off your plan. And with the Black Friday discounts, you can also access Proton Pass for 60% off with the other link on the screen. Thank you to Proton VPN for sponsoring this video. Up next, we will be talking about the internet's latest sensation, Fred Figglehorn. Will so-called YouTubers replace television? Is Fred secretly a Russian spy? More on this later.
Now, it's important to remember that in the 2000s, both PC and digital technology were advancing at a rapid rate, meaning that the online world was more sophisticated and more capable than it had ever been before. But all this change was still sudden enough for the internet to still have that experimental, anything goes attitude that it had back in the 90s. So what you have is essentially much more advanced versions of websites that were seen more as a novelty than something of practical use. A shining example of this would be a humorous website called JibJab.
JibJab!
This was a very popular site that started in 1999 following the rise of Flash technology, which it hugely relied on to make these very unserious, surreal videos. The history of JibJab is actually quite interesting, as the whole idea started based on the idea that production costs for animation were going to go down while distribution would go up, all thanks to the internet and its technology giving previously undiscovered talent a platform. The founders of JibJab, Evan and Greg Spiridelis, would end up being one of these people. It all started off with them making very over-the-top and funny e-cards for other websites. You know, the ones that you could send to people through email just by clicking a button on a web page. But the fun thing about these cards is that you could add your own face to them, often in ridiculous, even embarrassing situations. This really took advantage of this new Flash technology to create a personal experience that was also very surreal by clashing different visual mediums. It has a sort of South Park look to it, which obviously was becoming very popular at the time. But you know what else was really big at this time? Political satire. With the very controversial Bush administration coexisting with this era where more people had a global voice than ever before, it was a recipe for a lot of political, often touchy and racy humor. While JibJab was a tamer example of this, there were moments where they really pushed the envelope. In fact, it was this that brought them from being a rather niche e-card company to online entertainers of mainstream status. Their videos satirizing the 2004 US presidential election went massively viral, at least what you could call viral at a time before YouTube. They had seen success before in 2000 with their video on rapping founding fathers and the election between Bush and Gore, which was of course a super controversial election. Some of their works even appeared on television at this time, further developing the bridge between the internet and centralized mass media. But things would really take off for them with their videos on the election between Bush and John Kerry, which was also, of course, a very divisive election. By the way, fun fact, the image of John Kerry used in these videos is now lost media. Just thought that was interesting. These videos were viewed over 80 million times. The JibJab website received millions of signups within just days and even landed the founders on The Tonight Show. They would even become ABC World News' People of the Year in 2004. JibJab was now everywhere in the online space. But of course, they didn't just continue doing political satire. They were even the creative minds behind some early viral videos on the new video sharing site, YouTube. One notable channel of the time they worked with was Danebo, the channel which would later create the Annoying Orange series. I remember a few times putting my face on these crazy videos, often doing things like surfing and skiing. I thought it was just very fun. Now, the JibJab website still exists, but in a very different form than it previously did, and does not quite have the same following and novelty. This was both a conscious decision by the founders, who wanted to just move on from making so many of these flashy videos, pun intended, but also Flash technology just becoming obsolete with time really did it as well. The internet, as a result, then became more minimalist and professional looking, so the appeal for a website like JibJab just wasn't as strong anymore. But this emphasis on user personalization that sites like JibJab exhibited with its material would also extend to the web pages themselves. Thanks to things like targeted advertising, which effectively turned the user into the product, rather than traditionally the other way around, what would have been otherwise premium products and services suddenly became free. This meant that online users from all backgrounds can maximize these growing technologies by making the ultra-personal web pages of their dreams. One social media site which embraced this very concept would explode in popularity in the early 2000s. This website was called MySpace. Now, MySpace heavily took advantage of a technology called cascading style sheets, or CSS for short. Before its official introduction in 1996, web design almost exclusively relied on using HTML coding. If you wanted multiple different pages on your website to have similar characteristics, such as specific background color or font, you had to go into the HTML code and manually specify that for each page. Even if you were using a WYSIWYG type interface to design your site to simplify the process, this still made the page source overly bloated and disorganized. This would make changing things more difficult or time-consuming if, for whatever reason, someone had to go in and inspect the code. But with CSS, all you had to do was include a little style sheet file in your web server, and all your design preferences could be made here. Now, instead of manually changing every web page, you could just make one single change in this file, and that file would make all the site-wide changes for you, as long as those pages were linked to the style sheet. This made web design easier and more organized than ever before, allowing for people to customize things like fonts, colors, and page layouts with much less hassle. CSS would also adopt many more technologies as the internet got more powerful, allowing users to express themselves in virtually any way they wanted. For many people, MySpace was their introduction to this. Each user's profile essentially had their own unique style sheet that they could make their own customizations to. Not just visual ones like fonts and colors, but even including things like animated images and auto-playing music whenever you visited the page. This allowed for every MySpace user to create an online experience that was different from the rest. Like a digital snowflake, everyone was unique. Soon after, other platforms like YouTube would adopt a very similar approach with YouTube channel layouts, which also included CSS customization, albeit not as flexible. But still, it was a clear indicator of where the web was going. Now everyone could be a web page designer, which ironically would start to be the problem. One of the very things that made MySpace so popular would end up contributing to its demise. It arguably gave users too much creativity. One of these things, as it turns out, was a lack of security. Someone was able to find a vulnerability in MySpace's customization tools and spread a computer virus across the site using CSS coding. Now, this incident wasn't the single cause, but it certainly didn't help. The issues that over-customization brought were a bit more long-term and systemic. As it turns out, giving everybody full creative control of their web pages produces undesirable results from people who had next to no creative experience. So with all the incredibly well-designed web pages came a plethora of horribly designed, cluttered eyesores, because these were often people who, frankly, didn't know what they were doing. This eventually ended up creating a convoluted, unsightly experience for a lot of people accessing MySpace. This was accompanied with the News Corps merger, where MySpace ads started to become much more intrusive and distracting. This just ended up making the site as a whole very disorganized and overwhelming for a lot of people. Then a website called Facebook comes along. It opens its site to the public rather than being exclusively for college students like it initially was, and essentially provides people with the MySpace experience, but in a much more simplified, organized, and even professional manner. At around this same time, you see the launch of the iPhone, and smartphone market share starts to compete with traditional PCs. As it turns out, CSS isn't very agreeable with smartphones, let alone with a very small touchscreen. It is this, along with the rise of HTML5 and obsolescence of Flash, that ultimately killed the fad of CSS desktop-only websites, which therefore killed MySpace. This is the time you start to see web pages become more simplified and direct, because that is much easier and convenient to navigate on a smartphone. Now, MySpace is still around, if you really want to get technical, but it is very much a more dull shadow version of its former self, not garnering nearly the amount of traffic as it once did. But obviously, this change to web design did not happen overnight. It was gradual and took many years to really take over. So even with the downfall of MySpace, you still have this web customization existing in other ways, especially with designing entire websites. I like to call this the iCarly era of web design, roughly from 2008 to 2011, where you see very creative web page designs that often emphasized a desktop/laptop exclusive experience. Because of course, smartphones were still new. Many of these website builders were also free, using the targeted advertising approach that we mentioned earlier. One website that really stood out in this era of free web design was a site called freewebs.com, which would later become just webs.com. This was basically GeoCities, but updated for Web 2.0. Especially since GeoCities closed in 2009, this would only work in their favor. It did with dynamic web pages what GeoCities did with static web pages, allowing for people who had no idea how to code to create their very own customized website through a click and drag environment, only looking at the code if they absolutely needed to. All people had to do was create an account, choose a template, and work from there, making any changes they deem necessary. The website was easy to log into once it was published, just by typing in whatever name for it you chose, followed by .webs.com, or just .com if they used the paid version. I built so many websites with this service back in the day, more than I can even remember. And if my memory serves me correctly, my pages were quite creative. There were arguably much better services at the time, like Yola, Wix, Weebly, WordPress, and so on, but I think I gravitated more towards Webs because it had such a memorable name. But ultimately, all these services pretty much offered the same thing, even if some were better than others. They all had a focus of making your webpage completely unique to you and feel like its own digital world. Many of these site builders are still around, but they have since shifted over to this minimalist approach, much like MySpace and YouTube and everyone else. But Webs.com officially dissolved in 2023, and its traffic did peak in the late 2000s, with the service having 18 million monthly visitors in 2007. This creative sphere then allowed for skilled developers to create things that were once impossible: advanced online gaming. Online gaming in the 90s was by no means unheard of, but it was definitely limited, especially before the days of Flash Player and during a time where dial-up still reigned supreme. But with the rise of broadband internet, the growing and advancing presence of Flash Player, and the success of websites like Newgrounds and World of Warcraft, it was now clear that online gaming had a lot of potential, particularly gaming for young children. After all, this was the generation of the future. What better way to get them familiarized with all this technology that's clearly here to stay than by making it entertaining? In 2005, you have the launch of Club Penguin. After many unsuccessful prototypes throughout the early 2000s, developer Lance Priba ended up creating a game that essentially had the multiplayer role-playing setup of World of Warcraft, but combined with the feel and likeness of a Flash Newgrounds kind of game. Lance got the idea for the game after seeing, in his office, a Far Side comic that happened to feature penguins. It was basically multiple games within a game. You could do things like join a dance competition, watch out John Travolta, work at a pizza parlor, fishing, Jitsu-style games, and much more. These games could also earn you in-game money, which you could then use to buy accessories for your penguin, or even things for their igloo. I remember having a disco floor in your igloo just meant you were the cat's pajamas, man. You could also have a digital pet, which you had to feed, pay attention to, and so on. I learned a lot from that. I could hardly take care of a plant, let alone a puffle, as a 9-year-old. I'm sorry, Coraline, with a lowercase c, for paying more attention to Coraline with a capital C. But yeah, Club Penguin was big, eventually even being acquired by Disney in 2008, allowing many children to experience the joys of the internet by waddling around and even chatting with friends. I actually got permanently banned from Club Penguin for swearing, which I never did, so somebody's gonna pay for that. But as you would have guessed, the rise of smartphones and App Store culture drove many children away from Club Penguin to focus on these new platforms instead. This, combined with decreasing traffic and, once again, the obsolescence of Flash, led to Club Penguin shutting down in March of 2017. Though many people have created mirrors of the online game, which you can visit right now, and it's even pretty well optimized for HTML5. However, these keep getting DMCA'd, as you would have guessed, so it is a bit of a game of cat and mouse, but just throwing that out there. But the Newgrounds style of gaming still continued to exist in its own right. Now, I've already talked about Newgrounds in detail in the past, so I'm not going to go too far into it here, but that's also because Newgrounds was by no means the only one of its kind. even though it may have been the most innovative and popular. Another iconic entertainment site of the time was a special one called eBaum's World. This was basically a variety entertainment website. It relied on CSS and Flash media to create an experience that provided a little bit of everything. This ranged from games to videos, funny pictures, articles, live chat rooms, and even more risque adult content. If you've seen my video about weird websites from the 2000s, you may remember when I talked about ManiacWorld.com. That was basically the more surreal, creepier version of eBaum's World. The best way I can describe eBaum's World is that it was Reddit before Reddit, even the YouTube before YouTube. In fact, what helped it really grow in popularity was that it incentivized users to post by rewarding them with e-bones. A lot like the Reddit karma system, except these e-bones could actually be exchanged for eBaum's World merchandise and even sometimes real money, rather than just being bragging rights that pretty much mean nothing. Some iconic Flash videos at the time were widely circulated on eBaum's World, like Numa Numa and Peanut Butter Jelly Time, which even became part of the site's branding. But as you would have guessed, eBaum's World was essentially just a community that hosted and distributed other people's content rather than creating its own, which actually ended up becoming the problem. As the site grew, eBaum's World faced a lot of legal troubles involving copyright, particularly violations from Albino Black Sheep, Newgrounds, and even some mass media conglomerates. Things did get a bit ugly during this, leading to things like DDoS attacks and even threats being made against the communities. But even with all these problems, eBaum's World's popularity continued to grow, even landing them some television deals, even with one involving them having a weekly segment on ABC. But as the internet grew and platforms like YouTube took over, which prioritized making original content, the appeal for eBaum's World began to wane. And just like many other sites of its kind, it became a more minimalist and watered-down version of its past self. If you would like to learn more about non-existent but more peculiar websites from the 2000s, you can find my video about that right here, as well as related videos in the description. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for exclusive and ad-free content. I am also sending out holiday cards to my top tier. Get one while you still can. You can always buy me a coffee as well. Thank you for watching, everyone.